That's what I was referring to.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for coming out to our public work session for the Elkhart Community Schools for this July 22nd. At this time, I'd like to call the public work session to order. And I'd like to at this time turn it over to Policy Analytics to discuss Senate Enrolled Act 1's impact. That's kind of a broad statement, but we'll let you get into the details.
Perfect. Thank you. All set. Awesome. Appreciate the opportunity to be here with the board this evening. I think it was back in March, Policy Analytics was here presenting to the board as well. And again, Policy Analytics is based out of Indianapolis, and we specialize in financial analysis for government units such as schools, cities, and towns. And today here we're to talk about Senate Enrolled Act 1, which is the result of legislation that was passed by the legislative body on April 15th and signed into law by Governor Braun, and really has quite a bit of impact when it comes to our property tax related funds, specifically the debt service and the operations fund. And we're going to walk through those tonight. It is really a complete rewrite of our property tax system in terms of the way taxes interact and revenues interact with school districts. And so start here tonight. Policy Analytics, we're working with roughly about 80 districts across the state, school districts across the state, and working to understand these impacts. And three real main points that have started to come to the forefront have been Senate Enrolled Act 1 impact on tax rates and what it's going to do for tax rates, not only for school districts, but other governmental units. The impact it may have on levies or the revenues that are generated by the school district, and then potentially the impact on taxpayers and what we may see. And analysis is based off of what we know today in terms of what's come out of the legislative body here this past spring. And it starts really with the base understanding, of how property tax revenue is generated. And we start with a simple calculation, which is net assessed value, which is the assessed value. It's the value of all the properties, the homes, the businesses across Elkhart Community Schools after any deductions they receive. That's what we refer to as net assessed value times a tax rate generates the revenue. And we've been living in this world where assessed value has been going up. If we think of really primarily driven by home prices, and we talked a little bit about that this past spring, was as home prices have risen across the country and across the state, assessed value has gone up, and the schools have seen that. And when assessed value goes up, one, if I have a steady tax rate, it's going to generate additional revenue, or I have the ability to potentially lower that tax rate and generate the revenues needed when I have a growing net assessed value. Senate Enrolled Act 1 really flips the script in that regard, in that it is going to cause really a potential decline in net assessed value over the next several years. And as assessed value goes down, the mechanics are it has the potential to drive up tax rates and impact the revenues. And that's really what we're going to highlight tonight in the legislation. And so this is really a systematic change for government units when we look at Senate Enrolled Act 1. Why and how? So the legislation made a number of changes for different groups, the first being homeowners. And if you've ever paid attention to your property tax bill, it starts with a gross assessed value, which is correlated and relative to market value, what you could sell your home for theoretically. And that is the gross assessed value. And then we've had deductions of a standard deduction of $48,000 and a supplemental deduction of 35% is what we've had in place. The legislative body made changes, as you can see outlined on this chart, that phase out the standard deduction over the next 6 years and increase the supplemental deduction from 35% up to 66%, basically 2/3. Part of that reason is that a $48,000 deduction is a flat deduction and theoretically becomes worth less as a deduction as my home value goes up because it stays stagnant during those times. Where if I have a percentage deduction of the overall assessed value, as my home value goes up, so does that deduction. And that was really the drive from the legislative body. What this really does at the end of the day, if we try to translate that, is it grants a larger deduction for homeowners. Okay, so it's going to increase the deduction of homeowners. And really the big broad theme, if we're going to talk tonight, is as we increase deductions, we drive down net assessed value, and that's going to have impact on rates and revenues. And that's our big kind of broad stroke. And so we see that first for homeowners here in this slide. The second piece they did for homeowners was to enact a new homestead credit. So starting in 2026, a homeowner would receive an additional 10% up to $300 on their tax liabilities, we call it, or what they actually pay in terms of property taxes. So if I have a home worth $200,000 and I pay $2,000 in property taxes, because that's my 1% cap according to state law, I'm going to receive an additional $200 off my property tax bill and only pay $1,800. The $200 that's not now paid by that homeowner is going to be revenue that's not collected by the local units of government, including the schools. So this is a change that we're going to see play out in terms of revenue because of this additional credit played. They also made some minor changes to some credits that have been in place for over 65, disability, veterans. They increased those credits and also increased the income eligibility to extend those credits a little further for those groups. At the end of the day, trying to give some property tax relief for homeowners. And that was really the goal of the legislation, was to create property tax relief for homeowners in the state. Additionally, they introduced deductions for what we refer to as our 2% property tax class. That includes things like apartments, long-term care facilities, and agriculture. And these groups have not had deductions in the past. And so this is a new deduction for this group. And as you can see on the bottom left-hand side there, the deductions, again, phase in over the next 6 years. And so as we look at all this legislation, we're really building towards 2031 when deductions are fully in place. And again, the broad stroke here, we're increasing or introducing deductions. And as we bring additional deductions, we're going to drive down the net assessed value for the school district to have impact on rates and revenues. The last piece of change is probably the most complex. Not that any of the things we've been talking about are all that simple to begin with, is business personal property. Business personal property is the equipment inside or associated with a business. So I often say, if you think of a data center, we hear of it's the servers inside of it, or a farm, you might think of a combine, right? It's the equipment that's used to operate the business. And there has been in place what they've called a de minimis amount of up to $80,000 that a business did not have to report equipment for state taxable purposes. So if I had a $75,000 piece of equipment, I don't have to report that for taxes, right? It's tax exempt. That de minimis amount changes from $80,000 in 2027 to $2 million. So now if I have a $1.8 million piece of equipment, I no longer have to report that for taxable purposes at the state level. What that in essence does is pulls assessed value out of the system. And we'll see that in the data, and that does have impact here in the Elkhart School District in terms of your assessed value composition in the business personal property. And that again will have some impact. The second component of the business personal property is currently a business has the ability to depreciate a piece of equipment down to a 30% floor. So for easy math terms, if I have a $10 million piece of equipment, I can depreciate it down to $3 million. I pay taxes on the $3 million of that piece of equipment. Moving forward, starting January 1, that $10 million piece of equipment can actually be depreciated down to zero for taxable purposes at the state level, and really relieving some tax liability for that business. And so there's some potential long-term for an economic incentive for a business to purchase new equipment, replacing old, knowing they'll be able to depreciate it further and generate tax savings, or create a new entity to lease or shift that business personal property to, and again, depreciate that down. And so we know there's some short-term impact that we're able to model out. The longer-term impact, I think, remains to be seen of what that looks like for the business personal property that's above the $2 million figure. But, for all intensive purposes, if you look at this as a long range period over the next 20 years, it really begins to phase out business personal property as a taxable piece in the state of Indiana. And so that causes shifts at the end of the day in terms of tax, who pays, where those revenues come from. The last kind of statewide piece, and this starts to touch a little bit of the district, though your debt service rate has been well below this threshold, is two debt service rate thresholds that determine how you have to operate in terms of projects. The district's rates right now is around 28 cents. So really the focus is around the 40-cent threshold. But just to clarify, there's been a legislation that if your debt service rate was above 80 cents, you had to take any project to a referendum, to a capital referendum. Then mind if it was $2 million or $200 million. And then if you were above 40 cents, it required you to do additional hearings. You did not have to take it to a referendum. It could be in that situation, but requires a few more legal steps really at the end of the day. Why has this become a little more relevant for the school district? Is we've created a system that when net assessed value goes down, tax rates will be driven up. And it could just put the district in a situation where the 40 cent may force the districts to operate just a little differently in terms of those projects. So again, not I call it major concern for the school district in regards to this, but just something for the district to be aware of at the end of the day because of the changing mechanics. Okay, talk a little bit about Elkhart Community Schools data. This looks at the net assessed value composition. This is after deductions. This is what we tax on. This is what generates revenues at the end of the day and determines tax rates. And overall, the district has a fairly diverse pie, as we call it. And you look on the left-hand side between residential. Anytime we have a solid base of commercial and industrial, we're tapping into the 1%, 2%, and 3% tax categories, which allow that diversification to help generate some revenues. When we look at 2026, there's not a whole lot of change, right? The change for the district in 2026 is that 10% liability credit, and that we're going to model out in just a little bit. When you look at 2031, when the deductions and everything are fully in place, the biggest piece to call out is the change in the personal or the yellow, and that's the business personal property. And that really actually happens in 2027 if we had that pie, and that is when we exclude any business personal property parcels under $2 million. We're pulling those out, we're pulling that assessed value out, and that is why that piece of the pie gets smaller. And at the end of the day, like I sometimes like to kind of clarify, is if this pie represents $100 in 2025, and those are the dollar figures each of those groups are bringing, when we look at 2031 and the personal property gets smaller, it doesn't change that the pie's maybe still $100. It just changes that the others potentially have to bring more to the table. And so it shifts the tax burden and who pays taxes, and also can create additional circuit breaker for districts in terms of revenue impact. And that's one of the things that we see here for Elkhart Community Schools is the pie gets smaller a little bit, it shifts, and it creates impact on revenues at the end of the day because of that change. We're going to talk really two scenarios here, and these are really just placeholders. We're trying to obviously model this out for districts across the state. Debt service can have some impact on your revenues in the operations fund, and so we've modeled these really in two ways. One of those is holding your 2025 debt service levy, or revenue as we call it, constant moving forward. And the other is to say, if we are operating in the old model and you had your 28-cent debt service rate, as assessed value grew, it would generate additional revenue or levies. And you can see there on the rate situation, the levies get higher. And as those rates get higher, it can have impact, those levies get higher, it can have impact on the operations fund revenue. And so we just want to model this out in a couple of ways. As assessed value comes out this fall here in just a couple of months, that's when we'll fine tune this to some of your more specific scenarios as we model that for the district. But just wanted to highlight that when we talk levy and rate, what those mean and what we're referring to. This is the chart that really is defining what we're seeing in terms of impact. This is our net assessed value projections for the district. The green line is gross assessed value, and that is before any deductions. Again, that is a market-based. It's defined by a Supreme Court case. That did not change in the legislation. And so as assessed value has worked overall in the past, it will continue to do so in the future. And as you see, that green line continues to grow in future years. And that is because of policy analytics. We investigate economic data around housing, around commercial sectors. And right now, there's nothing in the economic data that tells us that assessed value would not continue to grow. That a home value, gross assessed value, wouldn't maybe move from $170,000 to $180,000 to $190,000 in future years. And so we have approximately about 3% on average trending AV growth in future years. And so that's why that bar continues to go up. I do want to highlight, and I don't have the pointer within this piece, but if you look between the 26 and the 27 year on the green line, there's a spot where the chart kind of flattens out and the assessed value goes from $8,373,000 to $8,333,000. So it goes down just slightly. Well, why is it going down in that year when every other year it's trending up? That is because in 2027, the business personal property changes and we pull out any of those parcels under $2 million, and that has an impact. It flatlines your AV during that year, right, in that piece. And so we see that business personal property having an impact on your overall assessed value. The blue line represents net assessed value, so that's after deductions prior to Senate Enrolled Act 1. And then the orange line represents our projections of your net assessed value after Senate Enrolled Act 1. And this is where we see assessed value declining over the next 6 years until 2031. In 2031, all the deductions are fully in place. And so we see it start to rise. It's more muted. It's not as large of growth as the green line because of those additional deductions, but it starts to trend a little bit more like the gross assessed value. And so we've got this piece of a 6-year decline in net assessed value and then potential return to some growth in that. And this, again, declining net assessed value is going to have impact on rates and revenues. And depending on how this chart flows, again, these are projections. If assessed value comes in better than what is projected, it's going to be more positive for the district. If assessed value comes in less because we see a pullback in the housing market or a plateau in the housing market, these could look obviously worse at some point. And so, again, best estimates as we stand today in terms of growth. But what that means is we start to look at a situation that tax rates are one of the first places we will see some impact for the district. So this is looking at the district's total tax rate between the debt service and the operations fund, currently at the 91, 97. And you can see it growing depending on the debt service, whether the levy or the rate, depending on where you settle in on your debt levies each year. The solid lines are post-Senate Enrolled Act 1. The dotted lines are pre-Senate Enrolled Act 1. And so we see the potential over the next 6 years of anywhere from a 30 to 40 cent increase in the overall tax rate. I will tell you, this is not different from the 80 other districts that we're running this information for. Okay, this is what we're seeing statewide for all school districts. The decline in net assessed value, the mechanics of the bill drive up rates in order to generate those revenues that the district has had in the past. And I think that's the challenge, is the district's not necessarily increasing revenues, but the tax rate's going up, right? The county will see a similar chart. Cities and towns will see similar charts. Because again, as you decrease the net assessed value, you drive up the overall tax rate, right? And on average, we're seeing for schools anywhere from a 30 to 50 cent increase over the next 6 years, right? It's not an overnight switch. It's a gradual piece, but we do see that driven up. And if you've heard Chairman Thompson speak, Chairman Thompson is the chairman of House Ways and Means for the Indiana House of Representatives. They've talked about moving overall tax rates between the school, the county, and the city or town up to a $3 kind of level overall. And so if you hear them talk, there was the intention that tax rates would drive up because they believe at the end of the day, it creates a system of really, how's the best way to describe this? Individual units levies are really set, and the taxpayers would see some initial relief at the end of the day from that. So we know that rates were intended to be driven up, as we've heard from the author of the legislation. We also see this again in the debt service rate. So that current 29 cent, if you want to call it, debt service rate, even if you keep your debt service levies the same, would increase slightly. Again, you could, if depending on the rate, move close to that 40 cents and that threshold, though it takes some time. And again, I think that's years off, but we see this both in the debt service and primarily a lot of this is being driven in the operations fund. And so that's where we're seeing a lot of the rate growth is not really in your debt service that you do have a little more control. It's really driven in the operations fund and the mechanics of the bill. So what's that mean then, I guess, next in terms of revenues for the school district? And so this chart is looking at the operations fund net levy, so net revenues at the end of the day in that levy situation. And so you could see in 2025, it's approximately 23.2 million. The dotted line is where we would have expected revenue growth prior to Senate Enrolled Act 1. And so again, we would have seen some growth in that overall figure. As you look at the revenue of the solid line post-Senate Enrolled Act 1 from 25 to 26, it's relatively flat. Really no increase in revenue in the 26 operations fund. And that's really driven by that 10% credit. Okay, that $200 I mentioned earlier that homeowner's not paying on their bill now because of that credit is revenue that the district's not going to collect, and that's why it's flatlined there. From 26 to 27, you have what we call the pension bonds roll off. The pension bonds were established years ago for school districts across the state because many districts had what we determined as unfunded liabilities in terms of retirement type benefits, right? Pension type benefits. And the state forced school districts at the time to take out bonds to back those obligations and could pay those off over time. But it actually comes out of your operations fund. So it wasn't new money that the districts were able to actually access. You subtracted it out of your operations fund. Those expire in 26. They're paid off in 26. So that money now flows back into the operations fund that was being used to pay off those pension bonds. And so that's why you see that spike and increase in from 26 to 27 because of the pension bonds being paid off and the operations fund dollars or the operations fund seeing those dollars roll in. And then we see a little bit of a decline from 27 to 28. And that is because there is a property tax replacement credit that is funded at the county level through local income taxes. It's a mouthful to say in that piece, and a lot to comprehend, right? So what's that mean? Local income tax. So the county has an income tax that they take from residents within the county. That revenue comes in and they disperse it out in different ways. One of those being a credit on the property tax bill to try to lower the impact overall of property taxes. Because your residents are at the cap, it's really then used to actually support revenue for the local units in lieu of those caps. And that is scheduled to go away in 2027 due to the legislation. The current local income tax agreements go away in 27, so the property tax replacement credit goes away in 2027, and the revenue drops for the district in 27 from 27 to 28. So we've got this bit of a roller coaster in actual revenues that we're going to see. But I also think the piece to point out here is you can see the gap continue to grow between the dotted line and the solid line, between revenues we would have projected the district to receive to what we now project the district to receive after Senate Enrolled Act 1, right? And as you see it culminate in 2031 of about a $5 million change from the baseline in terms of revenue on an annual basis, right? So a significant hit when it comes to the revenue in lieu of Senate Enrolled Act 1. And so, again, impact on the operations fund as we start. But the legislative body wasn't done, and they included some additional pieces. This is that post-circuit breaker credit or the 10% liability credit. And these are the dollar figures that it represents, right? So I take that $200 and when I aggregate that across the entire community, it ends up being in totality about $1.2 million of revenue that the school district won't receive as a result of all that homeowner relief. Most of that impact falls in the blue on the operations fund. And that is actually already modeled out, as I noted in that previous slide, right? I showed that the 26 revenue and that moving forward is stunted because of that $800,000 in revenue not being received due to this credit. The challenge is there's another $400,000 that hits your debt service fund because the debt service fund is not protected from this impact. And so theoretically, what that looks like is that in 2026, if you had a $14 million levy in your debt service fund, you would only receive $13.6 million. So you'd be short $400,000. You need that $14 million, though, to pay your debt payments. So where does that shortfall come from? Any cash balance you have in the debt service fund. What happens when you run out of cash balance in the debt service fund after several years? Then you have your rainy day you have to use or your operations fund. We believe that the legislative body is going to change this because it could potentially, at the end of the day, cause school districts to default on debt payments because of their particular situations. And we don't believe that the state is going to want the legislation to cause defaults on debt payments or downgrades in ratings from S&P or Moody's at the end of the day. And so we feel they will make a move similar to they do to current circuit breaker, which is call it protect the debt service fund. So what's that mean? It means that impact of that $400,000 would no longer hit the debt service fund and you would get your full amount in the debt service fund. But that orange would now turn to blue and impact the operations fund and be revenue you would not collect in the operations fund. And so as we revisit this chart, that maroon line now looks at your revenue in the operations fund and says, in 2026, if they make this change, starting in 27, you would receive about $400,000 less in the operations fund and just another impact to the operations fund in terms of overall levy, right? So again, now when we look at this potentially, in totality between that, it comes to, again, a fairly significant impact and gap in what we expected in terms of revenue and what you're receiving in revenue. And you fall into this category that we heard about from the legislative body, which was districts were not going to receive less, you're going to receive less of more. So instead of receiving the the dotted line, you're still going to have more revenue than you have in 25, just not as much as what you would have received, right? And that was kind of what they spoke to. And for majority of districts, that's the case. There's about 74 districts that actually receive fewer dollars in 26 than in 2025, and 85 districts that receive fewer dollars in 2028 than in 2025, right? So it varies across the state, but this is what they stated, right? And I think the challenge is you now have a 2%, 1 to 2% annual growth in your operations fund versus a closer to 4% growth, when we know we have cost in the operations fund that we don't control. Utilities, for example, all three major utility companies across the state have passed either last year and or planning again this year rate increases. The district absorbs those. Property and casualty insurance, transportation, all of those costs continue to have increases, and it's going to be faced now with more muted revenues at the end of the day for the district. And so this is, again, was the intention, I would say, of this bill was that it was felt that districts had enough dollars in their operations fund and could survive with a chart that looks something like this, right, at the end of the day. And so we do see impact when it comes to the overall really revenue stream for the district. Let's talk a little bit about taxpayer. We have looked at this from the taxpayer perspective, really with the question, did the legislation do what it intended? And we take that intention thinking that it was to create historic property tax relief or property tax relief for homeowners, right? And the question, the reason we ask that is because if it did not do that, maybe to the level that was intended, are we done with this legislation or not? Okay, and I'll reference that the bill was signed, as I mentioned, into law on April 15th by the governor, and 8 days later, a bill was passed with amendments to Senate Bill 1 because it was moved very quickly through both the House and the Senate. And so there is an element that a lot of things were passed, maybe not knowing the full impact at the end of the day, right? Or run at a statewide level impact that tells one thing, but looks very different when we localize it to the individual districts. And I think we're seeing that in the data at the end of the day. But to speak to the taxpayer impact, and I know you have more than one taxing district, so this is a simple just illustration. So tax liability, again, we're talking the amount of property taxes that the taxpayer would pay. And in this case, all of the homesteads within this taxing districts are at the caps, meaning they're paying the 1% max that they can on their tax bill. And you can see from 25 to 26 that liability does go down. Why does it go down? It's because that homeowner is now receiving a 10% liability credit that was passed into law as part of the legislation. So it is going to drive down the tax bill. However, if we look at that a little more closely, it would theoretically say that that taxpayer should receive $187 of credit. First of all, that's not $300. And I think that's one piece that people maybe hear is 10% or $300. They hear $300. It's 10% of what you're paying. So it's most cases not going to be the full $300. And in all actuality, if you look at it in 26, we're projecting that's closer to $130. Why is it not the full amount? Well, as my gross assessed value continues to grow the next year, so does my liability, and it eats into that credit that I would have expected to see. And so we think this is going to be an interesting piece, I think, in terms of how this plays out, because if assessed value is even greater than what we have in our projections, that $130 may be only $100 or $80. And people may be expecting one thing in terms of a credit and not seeing that actually play out when they see their tax bill. And so we think that's one thing that maybe tells us that the legislation didn't do what it intended. The other is when you look in the years after that, we see the tax liability continuing to increase. That's, again, as the gross assessed value of the home increases, so does the overall liability. And we really kind of move back to the system that we've had where each year the property tax bills have gone up. And it's not as much as maybe would have seen in the past because of the deductions, but it's definitely a potential for increasing tax bills. And so, again, we just wonder, at least from our perspective, of is this what was intended to happen? Is it what was expected to happen? And if not, what does that mean for the 2026 legislative session? Does that mean they're done tweaking this bill? I think we're hearing rumblings that there's already property tax reform phase 2 that may be coming in 2026. I don't know if that's good, bad, or indifferent, right? I think that's localized to each community. But I do think there is some things that they're not done yet, I think is what I think we would interpret with this, right? Is that there's some things pointing that they're not done. And so, I think at the end of the day, one of the things we've looked at for the district is this does have revenue impact. So we have been modeling the cash flow for the school district. And as we look at pre-Senate Enrolled Act 1, and we look then at after Senate Enrolled Act 1, we see really revenues go down, and revenues just increase the gap in terms of surplus deficit because we've not had a chance to adjust expenditures, right? And I think that's going to be one of the discussions for school districts across the state is they're facing lower or muted revenues than projected. And we have places where we don't control expenses, or we're facing $45,000 minimum teacher salaries, 65% of our salaries going to salaries and benefits, some, pressure from the state to continue to increase support. And those don't align when you have muted revenues. And so a lot of districts across the state are having some challenging conversations as a result of Senate Enrolled Act 1 and really what it means for the school district at the end of the day. And so more than happy to take any questions. I know this is probably not the most positive news, as maybe the understatement might say. It's been a challenge, obviously, having these conversations with school districts because we're seeing this kind of impact, and it's diverging from where we were, right? It's lower revenues than we expected, which is never a real positive, and it's going to force some additional conversations for school districts. I think the challenge has been no one truly knew the impact. We had a legislative services report that came out, I want to say roughly May, that just didn't have an accurate description of what the impact was going to be. And so districts are starting to see what this truly looks like. And it's definitely, I'd say, more impactful than maybe what was presented in that LSA report. And I think it's just now causing some conversations to begin to happen. So with that, Dr. Huff, members of the board, I'm more than happy to answer any questions.
One, I want to thank you for your in-depth presentation. I think this is clearly there's nothing good that came out of this legislative cycle for schools, but I do think with informed information we can make decisions and make them pretty early, and we know that some of those decisions are going to be difficult. Can you kind of talk to our community about one, what is the total anticipated reduction that we may receive as far as dollars over this? And then I want to also talk about 2028, why things change a little bit for the school district and how we share our funds as well.
So in totality, I would have to go back and calculate this exactly within this piece because the gap does grow from what we would have expected you to receive. Let me go back to this. Oh, I messed something up here, but I think I can maybe get there. Okay, this is why you don't let me run technology, right? At the end of the day, this is the gap that we're really looking at, Dr. Huff. And really those last years, you start looking 2028 and beyond, it's about a $5 million annual impact, right? Just in those years. It's a little more narrow in 26 and 27, to the tune in 27, you're probably looking at about a $2.2 million differential. And in 2026, it's probably closer to several hundred thousand. So when you add that up, you're getting close to $20 million of impact really over the next, 5 years within that piece of what you would have expected in revenue to what you're receiving, right, at the end of the day. So so a significant number, obviously, at the end of the day. Did you want me to address the 2028 in that piece? As we are more than happy to. So what is also factored into these calculations that I didn't highlight in the presentation was legislation that was passed that creates sharing with charter schools really across the state. 2 years ago, legislation was passed for 4 counties as a pilot, which we've seen has now opened to the state, but for 4 counties to begin sharing operation fund dollars with charter schools. Those 4 counties were Lake, Vanderburgh, St. Joseph's, and Marion. And so Evansville, Gary area, South Bend, and Indianapolis. And that's been in place, though it was a smaller figure because it was based on what we call incremental growth. So if I had $4 million in operations fund and next year I had 4.2, I was sharing a part of that $200,000. The new legislation really changed it to it's a per student amount. So now I'm going to share all of that 4.2 million during this time. And it starts in 2028. And it starts in as a 25% share in 2028, moves to 50% in 29, then to 75%, and then to 100%. And really, it's based on you having at least 2% of your enrollment or 100 students attending a charter school. Doesn't matter if it's in the county, doesn't matter if it's in your boundaries, doesn't matter if it's 100 charter schools that those 100 students go to. It is 100 students, regardless of where they go, that you'll begin sharing. And so I apologize, Dr. Off the top of my head, I'm not sure that exact number of the charters, but we do have that factored in, which is part of that growing gap that we see.
I think we send to 4 different entities. So I wanted to make sure that was a part of a conversation that we need to plan for as we move forward as well, knowing now school choice is being pushed out into the world, and there's micro schools. There's all these different types of school environments where families can choose to go. It's imperative that we explain to our community, and we have to show why Elkhart is a value for our families. So 92% of people still currently choose public schools, and I believe that we provide an excellent service for them. But I think it's more important that we tell this story of all those things that we provide for our families, because I don't think the average taxpayer and family member understands what is happening or what is going to happen. And I'm going to use the word kind of, it may be hyperbolic, but I believe the destruction that we're going to do to public schools based off what's happening here. And this is just not at the state level, the federal level as well. So I wanted to make sure that we had a presentation and kind of set the baseline of this is not happening in a few years. This starts right now when it comes towards we have to start thinking differently about how we view school funding. So again, I guess that wasn't a question. That was more of a diatribe, but that $20 million that hurts over the next 4 years. And so that was it. That was my part question, part dialogue.
Any other questions from the board? For those, I know I always say this, we've been at this since 3:30, so we had a lot of our questions asked and answered prior to this work session. So no further questions? Thank you very much. Very informative.
Yep, thank you.
Thank you.
All right. We'll now recess the public work session and reconvene at 7 o'clock for our normal board meeting. Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for coming out tonight for our July 22nd, 2025 Elkhart Community Schools Board meeting. At this time, I'd like to call the meeting to order. And if you can please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. Next on the agenda, we have the Elkhart Promise. Mr. Burnett.
The Elkhart Promise. Every student is known by name, challenged and supported by highly effective staff, and in partnership with the community will graduate college, career ready, and life ready.
Thank you, Mike. Dora, do we have? We don't have any? So I will not go over the invitation to speak protocol, as we have not had anybody turn in their slips to speak tonight. And so we will move past public comment and come to one of the things I enjoy is our moment of pride. Elkhart High School Unified Track. We got right to it. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, no. Yeah. Only got one of the trophies.
The other one's pretty high up in the ceiling. We could not get it down, so I
But there-
apologize for that.
But there is another one.
There is another one. Yes, that is
Yes.
correct. So, thank you again, everybody, for allowing us to be here tonight. I'd say this gets old, but this does not whatsoever. I want to thank our school administration. I'd like to thank our athletic department. I know both athletic directors here tonight. I want to make sure we thank our booster club, our bus driver who took us to state and back. She was awesome. I have a shirt for her whenever we get back into school. Our team parents, fellow teachers and staff for all their support throughout the year. Thank you to my coaches. I often say this, I am not the easiest person to work for and with. Maybe it's my level of expectations or just whatever else, but thank you to them. I'd like to thank the school board for allowing us to be here tonight. Elkhart Communications Department for all the different articles. When WNDU came, you all were there. I'd like to thank the school administration, superintendents, and then I'd also like to take this opportunity to thank Dr. Huff. And then our two captains for the season, Mia and Brennan, would like to present Dr. Huff with a state championship medal, a baton, along with a state championship shirt. So thank you very much. Brennan, follow me. Nope, you keep yours on, buddy.
Shirt on.
I appreciate it.
I may have other sizes in the vehicle. I was just,
Thank you very much.
thank you. Once again, thank you to everybody. So far, we have raised $4,300 towards our goal of $6,500 for state championship rings. So if anyone listening at home or elsewhere feels inclined to help, feel free to reach out. Just real quick on our season. Last year, I talked about the team being perfect. We didn't lose a meet all year. While this team may not have been perfect consistently on the track, they were perfect together, especially when it counted. I want to take a second. I don't want anybody in the room ever take this for granted. It's really easy to say, oh, you've won 2 back-to-back. You've won 3 in 8 years. All those are great accomplishments, but it doesn't mean it's always going to happen. Some people could say, well, it's easy to win a unified track state championship. And let me give you some numbers real fast. There are 32 6A football teams, meaning you only have to win 5 games to win a state title and beat 31 other teams. There are 100 4A basketball teams. There are 102 3A soccer teams, and there are 96 unified track teams. So while we say it's easy, it's really not.
I think there'd be 95 that
Yeah.
would say it's not.
Yeah, so it's not. Thank you. But I just never want us to take it for granted, because while the program is back to back, there are some kids in this room right now that this is their first one. And so I appreciate them getting to be recognized tonight as well. That's very important. I'm going to call up really quick Hayden Dinehart, as I'd like to have her read something to everyone.
So this is a poem called Our Deepest Fear by Marianne Williamson. Our deepest fear is not what we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is what we are powerful beyond measure. It is our light, not our darkness, that most frightens us. Your playing small does not serve the world. There is nothing enlightened about shrinking so that others won't feel insecure around you. We are all meant to shine, as children do. It's not just in some of us, it's in everyone. And as we let our own light shine, we unconsciously give other people permission to do the same. As we're liberated from our own fear, our presence automatically liberates others.
You may have heard that poem from the movie Coach Carter with Samuel L. Jackson. Very good movie if you haven't had a chance. And I asked Hayden to read that because as I was watching Coach Carter and thinking through that speech, I think about these student athletes, how they are the light, how they are the ones showing others in our school corporation, adults as well as other students. It's okay to sit with someone that you may not have sat with yesterday. It's okay to befriend someone that maybe you weren't friends with in middle school. And I think with our programs, we have our united groups at school, sound and theater. We have applied classes along with our unified sports. We have students. How many of you volunteer down in the intense intervention room at times? How many of you are going to go into education? How many of you are a better person because of this? All hands. We have nonverbal autistic students going to lunch with teammates now. That didn't happen a long time ago. We have students who go to graduation parties. Brendan, did you have fun at your graduation party?
Yeah.
Was there a lot of people there?
Yeah.
Yeah. Right? But that's what this is about. And I just want to thank the student athletes, because without them, we're not as successful as people as we are. And I think once they embrace the light that they can shine, they will be able to show others as they advocate throughout their lives, those that are leaving Elkhart. They can champion the Inclusion Revolution cause, and we can continue to make Elkhart a destination for athletics, but the place where inclusion starts and ends is with us in Elkhart. I want to thank everybody again, and I leave you with, we're all better together, and we were better together this season. And I continue to say this, light up, Lions. Thank you very much, everybody. I appreciate it. Yeah, of course. Hey, guys and gals, if you'll come behind this way, we can get a quick photo. Also, if any school board members would like, we do have, Samantha has posters from our celebration night that if anybody was unable to get one, we have some that we can get you one, okay? Go ahead, keep sliding.
I'll teach you. Yeah. Front and center. Yeah, get this. Let me get out of the way of it. Just don't see it coming.
You can send those chairs, actually.
We gotta sit together, everybody.
Almost.
There you go.
Put you right in. Look at the camera in the middle.
Okay.
Right.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. Make sure to say thank you, and you team members will meet outside, okay? Thank you.
Thank you.
I got one. And sign.
Right.
Yeah, it is very heavy if you've never held it.
I'm not.
I know, you got him a poster before, right? But this letter you got.
Yep.
All right, thank you guys. I appreciate
No
it.
meeting.
All right. After I would kind of always like to just end there, but we're actually going to move on to something as equally as gratifying as the excellence of Elkhart. Wendy?
Thank you, President Scott, members of the board, Dr. Huff, community members. I'm grateful for the opportunity to share highlights in the areas of academics, arts, and athletics. For academics, representing 8 different Elkhart Area Career Center programs, 14 of our outstanding students brought their talents to Atlanta, Georgia to compete in the 2025 Skills USA National Leadership and Skills Conference. 4 placed in the top 10 nationally, with 1 earning a 3rd place finish. Elkhart Community Schools partners with Tolson Center for Summer Explorers, Adventures, and Health Sciences, offering rising middle schoolers hands-on experiences through the Elkhart Area Career Center. Students learn CPR as part of the engaging summer program. For arts, several Elkhart High School students performed in Indianapolis as members of the Indiana All-State Jazz Choir. Selected through a competitive audition process, they represented our district with excellence and showcased the strength of our music program. And it's marching band time again. Percussion instruments and students perfecting their marching can be found across the high school campus, and preparations for the seasons get underway. Beginning band and orchestra students are also working hard, developing their skills for the year ahead. For athletics, Elkhart High School football recently scrimmaged 2 of the state's top programs, Hamilton Southeastern and Zionsville, at Indiana Wesleyan University. Our athletics held their own and caught the attention of IWU coaches. Beyond the competition, students had the opportunity to tour the campus and unwind at the pool. Elkhart High School athletics continues to show excellence through growth and opportunity with the exciting launch of girls flag football. The team recently held its first ever practice, marking a historic moment and expanding the athletic options for students. For our future happenings, July 25th is our first annual Elkhart football night. August 14th will be our first day of school. And as always, please be sure to follow the district and social media pages as we share each day the excellence of Elkhart schools.
Thank you, Wendy. Job well done. We actually had the right pictures this time. Yeah. Makes it a little easier, huh?
Yes, it does.
Great job, as usual. Next on the agenda, we have policy analytics to discuss the school year expenditure review.
Thank you, Mr. President. Dr. Huff, members of the board, Barry Gardner with Policy Analytics. Policy Analytics is based in Indianapolis and works with a variety of government units across the state, including schools. And I have the privilege of leading the schools division. We work with, again, a little over 80 districts across the state. Just briefly, a little bit myself, prior to joining Policy Analytics, I spent 23 years in public education as an educator, athletic director, administrator, and then spent the last 8 years in school finance as the chief financial officer at Brownsburg Community Schools, and then the assistant superintendent for finance and operations at the MSD of Wayne Township on the west side of Indianapolis. And so we help districts understand their financial picture and what is driving that and helping them tell their story. And the district had asked for Policy Analytics to do a bit of a deep dive into the financial history as we look at the school district's expenditures and revenues. And as always, I feel like in my career, I always have the fun of getting to follow things like the unified track with all these great, stories and accomplishments. And then we get to talk about school finance that everybody loves, right? And so want to just take the opportunity, to walk through this tonight, really at a high level. We can spend a lot of time digging in the weeds of school finance, but tonight is really just to show some broad pieces that we're seeing. And I think the blunt piece to really start to look at is some of the challenges the district is beginning to face, as we look at their financial picture kind of moving forward. And it's the result of some things many districts across the state have faced. There's been declining enrollment for the school district. And I think one of the pieces that we have to remember is that in our state funding system, dollars follow the students. We have a per student dollar figure that we do our enrollment counts in the fall and the spring, and based on the number of students that we have, we receive that revenue. And so when the number of students go down, so does the revenue that comes to the school district. And that's been one of the challenges as the district has seen some decline in enrollment. And again, then facing a time where there's always the desire for additional support for students. Right. And how do we best serve students and how do we model that out? And so tonight we're going to take a look a little bit at what we've seen in terms of some of those changing expenditures and versus some of the revenues that the district has seen. And so start, if I can take here. So again, some real high level pieces as we look at school year to school year changes. And really, we're highlighting the last couple of years, school year 21 to 22 to compare to school year 23, 24. And part of that really look is when we get back into the 1920 school year and the 2021, as much as we don't like to think about it, we have to remember that was COVID. And there are a lot of moving parts that impacted some of our funding as a result of COVID. And so to try to have some, apples to apples comparisons, we really looked at these 2 years, and we start with some of the big buckets within school funding. So general education is your classroom expenditures, special education, down to what we see in the operations fund. And really want to focus on the right-hand side of the column as we look and compare the percentage changes really over the 2 years in some of these areas from an expenditure standpoint. And I think first to baseline this a little bit is we're always going to expect more than likely some expenditure increases potentially year over year. We have inflation, right, that we've seen dramatically over the last several years. So we're going to expect, costs to go up. Schools have battled and faced a challenge of classified staff as we saw the private sector increasing their wages and schools had to react to those pieces. And so there's obviously economic factors both outside of school as well that we face. But when we think of that, we're going to, typically see something in the 3 to 5% kind of annual increase as a normal situation, which is, if we look over a 2-year period, would be in a 6 to 10% rough piece. And as we look at these changes here, we see obviously some much larger percentage increases than a 6 to 10% rough baseline that we might expect over a 2-year period. One that stands out is special education. Now, I will tell you, special education is a cost we're seeing rise across all school districts. Students continue to have needs, and that obviously drives staffing for those needs to support those students. And as we continue to identify students that have needs for additional supports, those costs have gone up. The challenge is while we're supporting those students with those additional costs, is they begin to take up a bigger piece of the pie, right? As we talk about a finite amount of dollars. And so that's one of the challenges that we face within that. But we see there's no one single area. It's been driven across many of these different areas in terms of these buckets that include salaries and benefits as well as operational cost. And I think the biggest piece is when we step back and we look at the total expenditures versus revenues over this 2-year period, is we saw an increase of expenses of 18% and revenues only increased by 5%. And again, part of that drag on revenue is the change in enrollment. And as students have declined in terms of enrollment, so have the dollars coming into that education fund specifically within those pieces. And I think anyone would expect a recipe for challenge would be when your expenses are outpacing your revenues, especially to a degree of this. And the further challenges we'll talk more towards the end is these compound, right? And they continue to compound year over year, especially when they're associated with staffing in terms of salaries or additional staff that we may have in the district. And so again, really, I think the broad stroke here is that we're seeing this really across the board, both educationally and operationally within the district, with expenses outpacing revenues. When we start to drill down, and this is one of the things we do at Policy Analytics, is to say, okay, maybe what are some of the areas that start to stand out more than others when we look at now what we call the account level, which starts to drill down maybe between, again, elementary or middle or high school, or as we see the 12,000 accounts there, some of the special ed cost. And again, we see some large jumps, especially in some of our specific special education costs that they've really doubled over the past couple of years. And again, when we see $1 million increases in that period of time versus revenues that aren't keeping pace, we're continuing to create pressure on our overall kind of structural balance for the school district. And again, then we see that play out really within both our maintenance of the buildings, in our 27100, it's called vehicle operation. That's our transportation. That is our bus drivers. That is our bus mechanics. It's the salary and benefits associated there. And again, have seen a large jump. So we know this is happening programmatically. We know this is happening across all of these areas. And even when we dig down deeper into some of the specific accounts, we see again on the right-hand side some of these both larger than normal percentage increases. And then we even see those nominal dollar figures increasing really over a 2-year period by $1 million or more in each individual account. And so again, we start to then peel back some of the layers here. And the next piece is to start to look at where are those being driven. And, you know, one of the pieces we see here pretty quickly is that salary and benefits are both up. Salaries are almost up 20% over that period. Benefits are up almost 14%. And, you know, big picture wise, when we look at things like salary and benefits, those are driven really by two pieces. How much are we paying and how many people are we paying, really at the end of the day, right? And I think one of the challenges we would interpret in that is as we see that large of an increase in both the salary and benefits, knowing the data around enrollment, right, is there seems to be a misalignment in terms of those type of expenditure increases specific to salary and benefits that we would expect if we've got a declining enrollment. In a declining enrollment, we would expect some contraction. It doesn't mean necessarily that the salary and benefits line would go down, right? They may stay relatively level and have minimal increases because we're giving salary increases, but they are much more constrained because we are right-sizing staff around that downsizing of enrollment. And I think our analysis within this is we are not seeing some of that alignment between enrollment and maybe staffing that we would expect to see in a situation like this. I believe and part of the analysis that it's roughly over 1,000 students decline over the last several years in terms of enrollment. And when again we think of $8,000 or $9,000 per student, we're talking $8 to $9 million of revenue that is now not coming into the district, right? And again, we think of 1,000 less students, we would start to expect to see some contraction in terms of staffing, which would be reflected a little bit in the salary and benefits line within this. And so I think that's a piece that we would encourage the district to really look at staffing levels, staffing ratios, both in certified and non-certified staff, because these are a combination of both the education fund and the operation fund. And so we would want to take a look at that deep dive in terms of staffing ratios on both of those funds across buildings to see, again, is that ringing true? But that's at least, I think, in our analysis and what we typically see in school districts is that if we see salary and benefits aligning and like that in terms of increases versus enrollment, we probably have some sort of staffing alignment that we need to at least evaluate at the end of the day. And again, that is sometimes tougher than others. We often say if I lose 10 students across the district this size, I may lose obviously quite a bit of revenue, but it's hard to reduce staff when I lose 10 students. However, when we start getting into losing several hundred students, that's when there's some opportunity, I think, to look at right sizing that staffing at the end of the day. And those are obviously tough conversations, but again, we look at the fiscal health, and that's a big piece of what's contributing to expenditures being at 18% versus revenues only at that 5% at the end of the day. When we dig down, the other piece that we start to peel back again, this onion just a little bit further, and we look at what we sometimes call the object code, which is just a more detailed analysis of some of these accounts between operations fund and education fund. We see that this plays out both with certified and non-certified salaries. Again, certified salaries are going to be primarily our teaching staff. Non-certified, are going to be paraprofessionals, bus drivers, maintenance workers. And we see those increases really in both, but especially in that non-certified area. And so again, I think it would be some of the analysis of what supports or where those non-certified increases are coming from. And then the other area that stood out, I would say inside of this is this area of other salaries or additional compensation. The other salaries portion is up a little over $2 million over the last 2 years. And the additional compensation is up approximately 1.2 million. And you can see the percentage pieces. That is going to fall in really compensation outside of the typical job structure, whether that be through stipends or additional pay for additional components. But there's obviously been an increase in this area of these stipends or additional compensation outside of what we would define inside the contract or the payment structure, that hourly wage maybe within the certified. And again, I think an area that our analysis is not judging that's right or wrong. It's just pointing out that as we increase that, we obviously take up a bigger piece of the pie, which leaves fewer dollars for other areas. And as we look again back to that expense over revenue, those expenses are outpacing the revenues that we're receiving. And so as we think about how we manage the school financial situation long term, we have to balance expenses against revenues. And when those are out of alignment, we start to create more difficult financial challenges for school districts. And again, so we see, again, whether that's education fund or the operations fund, we actually see some larger non-certified increases in the operations fund. And again, some of that, to be perfectly transparent, I think has been driven the last several years by competition with private sector. Right, we've had to increase salaries with non-certified, whether it be paraprofessionals, whether it be bus drivers, in order to compete with the private sector. Unfortunately, private sector has the ability oftentimes to raise prices or raise revenues where we do not have, as school districts, control over our revenues. It's really that enrollment-based piece within that. And so again, I think those were a couple areas that really stood out, though we, again, just see larger than I would say expected increases really across the board, whether it's the education fund or the operations fund at the end of the day. But these are definitely areas that are driving this. And This chart really just attempts to put a little bit of a visual to what we have seen over the last really 2 years of a situation that there was some balance, 2021, 22, in terms of revenue and expenses. Now, again, we get into that time period, gets complicated because, again, there was COVID. There was ESSER funding that was coming in during that time that created some support, in some cases, a little bit of false support. Having lived that in my time at MSD Wayne, there was a lot of dollars that came in that really could help Band-Aid, right? Some situations in terms of some funding. So that also would create some question in our mind of truly that accuracy of that revenue versus expenditure surplus in 21 and 22 of how much that was supported through things like ESSER. But you can see very quickly from 22 to 23 and 23 to 24, the rise of the expenditure, the teal line versus the rise in revenues. And again, these tend to compound. And as we create this gap, and then we start to look at what does this look like in a future sense, we're creating a structural imbalance at the end of the day where expenditures outpace revenues. And as we look at this kind of page here, and this is a summary page, this is looking at also taking into account Senate Enrolled Act 1. Here we're just looking at all the revenues that are coming into the district versus the expenses and the surplus deficit line there. And you can see over the last couple of years, this is a calendar year look versus a school year look. So there's a little bit of difference in these figures in full transparency, but they play out over time. And what we see is a growing deficit year over year and a projected continual, because again, as of right now, without changes to the current expenditure structure, knowing that revenues are going to continue to be muted due to Senate Enrolled Act 1, expenses are going to continue to outpace. And we have in this projection continued increases for salaries and benefits. And so again, we're compounding that a little bit in terms of that. But obviously that's always the goal of a district. And that's how we build that, right? Is our goal is to try to give increases in salary and benefits on an annual basis. But we see that widening gap in terms of that surplus deficit. And to the point where the district's going to face a cash balance situation and fairly quickly. And it's something that's obviously spurred, as you could see in the previous charts, in a pretty quick fashion. At least it looks like on paper, right? And that's where I question a little bit of the time during the ESSER and the COVID period, that some of it was overshadowed by those additional federal funds that came in. And Elkhart schools would not be alone in that. Again, working with a lot of districts across the state, ESSER kind of created a Band-Aid on some things that allowed districts to kind of continue. And then also we saw programs and pieces that we liked and tried to continue and support students, and yet didn't necessarily have the funds to support those as ESSER went away, right? And I think that's some of the things we see with school districts across the state is that mirage really that ESSER funding created that we saw in those charts. And so, I think at the end of the day, what we're seeing is not a sustainable situation. All right, we have a structural imbalance in which expenses are outpacing revenues to a pretty significant level. We see that those are driven really across the board, that I don't know that there's any area that I think our recommendations say you shouldn't investigate, right? In terms of potential savings or potential ways to look at your current expenditures. But definitely, I think one of the areas that stand out is really the salary and benefits increases there. And I think especially against that declining enrollment, that has been a major factor in terms of creating the structural imbalance. Is when you lose 1,000 students and you lose $8 to $10 million approximately, in revenue on an annual basis, and yet we continue to hold staffing potentially, and I think that's where that staffing analysis needs to happen, or we continue to have those additional increases that we try to do to stay competitive from a teaching standpoint and a salary standpoint. We've just created a gap that's going to continue to grow that needs to be evaluated and some strategies discussed to try to really right the ship here at the end of the day with this. And so, one of the benefits I would say, having lived in a larger district, Um, Larger districts often have a little more opportunity, I would say, when it comes to correcting ship. Smaller districts sometimes have a little more finite set of pieces and resources. And so making course corrections can be sometimes difficult in smaller scales. So I do think there's some opportunity here, being a larger district, to have some opportunities based on some of the information the district, I think, finds in some of your analysis. But I would think from a policy analytics standpoint and kind of sitting in the seat prior, there's definitely some next steps in terms of some additional information in terms of expenditures that need to be looked at maybe compared to peers, how peers are looking at in terms of expenses, and finding some ways to really, the blunt way of saying it is a reining in of expenses has to be there, because the district doesn't have the ability, just like a business does, to say, hey, we're going to raise prices or go generate additional revenue, right? Your state funding formula and your operations fund, really the pieces. So you don't have the ability to go generate new revenue. That makes things difficult in a school. And so unfortunately, the other place we have to look is how do we constrain expenses? And I think that's the next step in terms of analysis for the district from the policy analytics perspective as we look at the data. And so with that, I know that's a lot. It's fast and furious. I know it's, some detailed pieces and not obviously the best of news, but more than happy to answer any questions or address anything that the board may have.
Again, I want to say thank you for you and your firm's work in going through our expenses, our revenues, and helping to just share our story with our community. I think it's vital for the steps that we have to take moving forward. Also, we know not to schedule you on nights when we're celebrating champions. I think that's very important that we figure that out in the future.
Probably so.
I think one of the things that we also need to just be aware of is that this is just not through our state revenue as well. It's through our federal dollars also. I know that wasn't included in the presentation just last week. Elkhart, not last week, 2 weeks ago, on June 30th, we were informed that we were going to lose approximately $1.2 million, 6 hours before it's supposed to come into our coffers. We've already projected to utilize that money on staffing, on services, on professional development, on how we support our many of our students. It's tough. And the conversations we're going to have are also tough as well. So I just don't want to be remiss in saying that at a federal level, that's also happening also. And that money is never returning as of now. This will be the last year that we have Title II money, Title III money, Title IV money. So how we manage school finances is not going to look like what we thought 2 to 3 months ago. Our current reality is that we have lots of work to do, and there's nothing off the table when it comes to doing that work. So this is not what I expected when I took the job over 2 years ago. I thought I was to focus on the academics. You know what? Look at our academic outcomes and our art outcomes and our athletic outcomes at the impact report, which you can find on our wonderful new website, thanks to Wendy Wood. We should be very proud of the work that we're doing for our community. We return a lot of investments. So this is not really a question. I want people to understand how much Elkhart Community Schools means to this community, having a vibrant school community. But also a big part of our job is being physically sound to our taxpayers as well. So that's something I also take very seriously also. So the conversations working with our community, with our board, with our teaching staff, with our custodial staff, anyone who has anything to do with education, I'm going to be asking you over the next few months to help me brainstorm, to right this ship. This is not a one person's job to fix it. This is many years in the making. I think if I share with the board, just looking at the data, I went back 10 years, there's been overspending for a long time. And so these are not things that I want to talk about during our board meetings, but I think we need to be super transparent when it comes to finances. If we do not make some significant changes, we will be we'll have to be in another negative year next year. Deficit financing is awful for a school district. Can you talk about some of the perils that will happen if we do not make any changes?
Yeah, I mean, so
Like organizations come in and they
Yeah,
run
I
your
mean,
district for you.
yeah, I
That's
mean,
what I'm talking about.
yes,
And how close are we to that if this continues?
yeah. So the organization that takes a look at school finances, the Distressed Unit Appeals Board,
Mhm.
obviously referred to as DUAB. They're always monitoring school data.
Mhm.
And looking at the trending data within those pieces, and they do that on a frequent basis of reviewing your financials. So as soon as this most recent Form 9 data, as we call it, which is our school financial data documents, they'll be reviewing those. As they begin to see the challenges the district's facing, and they see that churn really on the cash balance, they'll be reaching out to the district to sit down and ask, are you aware, first and foremost? Is the board aware? Do you have any type of plan within those pieces? And try to work proactively with the district and creating really an effective corrective actions plan. And if you do not do that on your own, they'll require that. And depending on the steps moving forward, will require you to begin providing additional information. Now, good thing is you're already looking and have started that additional information in terms of cash flow projections and those pieces, but really it comes down to your decisions and ability to enact a corrective action plan to adjust the structural balance. And at the end of the day, if you do not, as we've seen in previous situations across the state could potentially step in and take over the district from a financial perspective, and DUAB in essence comes in to try to right the ship themselves. And so it is a very serious situation that could go down. And I do think as we look at this, if DUAB were to look at the financial pieces we looked up, they'd be coming to sit down to see what steps are you taking to adjust.
Thank you, Mr. Garner. So I just share that making difficult choices, that's what they are. They're difficult. Not anything that anyone wants to sit down and wake up in the morning and say, hey, how can we go and have tough conversations about changing the structure and the infrastructure of a school district. That's just something that I don't think anyone in this room wants to do, but I think leadership requires you to do those things. So again, looking forward to just having these conversations, working with the board, working with our community on how we get out of this situation. And it's not going to happen overnight. It's going to take some time. My number one priority, and I think our number one priority, is to make sure our kids have outstanding experiences in the classroom. And I do believe that we have some opportunities to do that, but I don't think that we can do that if we continue down the path that we've gone down. So being here 18 months, seeing some of the internal protocols that we've already started putting in place, I want to assure the community that we are taking this very seriously. And there's conversations that we're having amongst my leadership team, and you'll probably see over our next probably every board presentation from this point moving forward, some of the measures that we are putting in place to correct this issue. So I just want to say thank you for being a partner alongside of us as we right this ship, because I know that we will. And by having people like yourself, having outstanding leadership, and also working with every other stakeholder in the community who is invested in making sure that Elkhart is the destination place in the state of Indiana. Forgive your old school districts. I won't hold that against you. I think not only does it need to happen, it will happen. So I appreciate the board for all their support, for allowing me to work with people like you. And I think knowing how far we have to go will really change how we handle business moving forward. I didn't know some of these things, to be honest with you, when I got here. So thank you for you and your team's work.
Any other comments from the board? No, I want to kind of reiterate, thank you for your work. Let the community know, our eyes are wide open as a board. This is something we've been talking about now for a while. I think, you're kind of new to working with Elkhart Schools, been about 5-6 months. But I will tell you that, this community is like a community in a district like I know of no other. I remember at one point during the recession, I think Elkhart County had the highest unemployment rate in the country. And we were the quickest to turn it around as well. And so, that tells you about the resilience of this community, the district, the people that work for this district. I believe we can make the appropriate course corrections I think it will. I agree with you. It will take time. But this is something that, when you have the data, which we do have now, we have the historical data, we know where we came from, what we need to do. We have a great team and great leadership. I believe that we will turn this around. And, it will be a group effort. It will take everybody, but it will be able to turn around. You're right. I kind of like the agenda up until, here with the unified track team. But I think you kind of heard with the unified track team tonight. The year prior, they were undefeated, didn't lose a track meet. Came into this season and had some losses, had some different components, and kind of pulled it together, worked together. At the end of the day, they were state champions. And I believe that this leadership, this district, will be able to figure this out, and we will course correct and come out of it. So I agree with what you said as well.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gary.
All right, next on the agenda, we have consent items. Do I have a motion? Do I have a second?
Second.
Do I have any discussion from the board? This is the place where Ms. Mullins would say, well, yes, we do. She's not here, so I am going to attempt. And I always applaud the way she does it because she's very good at it. So please bear with me. But we do have some very benevolent donors for this week. We have Brinkley RV. They donated $1,000 to the Elkhart High School football team to be used to assist with the growth and development of the team. Thank you, Brinkley RV. As many times you've heard before, Welch Packaging Group has given $1,000 to the Elkhart High School football team to be used to assist with the growth and development of the team. Thank you, Welch Packaging. Elkhart General Hospital has given a total of $5,000 in the form of 2 laparoscopic instrument sets, various laparoscopic barlatric instruments, catheters, chest tubes, mesh, orthopedic implants, and sutures with an estimated value of $5,000 to our surgical service program, which will come in very useful. So we thank Elkhart General Hospital for that generous donation. We have the Elkhart Athletic Club has donated $4,000 to the Elkhart High School Athletic Department to be used for the recruiting platform, the Athletic Academy for all Elkhart High School sports programs. And so this is to assist our athletes in taking the next step to play at the next level, whether it's Division I, II, III athletics. And it gives them an opportunity to be seen and by other coaches and other programs in the recruitment process. So that's a very nice donation as well. So total donations for tonight in the amount of $11,000. So thank you to all of those generous benefactors. Retirees, we have Laura Corwin, special education at Daly, 16 years of service. Thank you, Laura. Gina Pericini, exceptional learners and psychologists, 8 years of service, will be retiring. And our last retiree is April Hunt from Elkhart High School Food Services, years of service 11. So thank you for all your time served and the commitment to not only the district, but the students that you served. Thank you. Thank you.
Kelly, I'm sure she.
I hope Kelly was listening.
Okay.
I have a motion. I second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Old business. Mr. Thorne, you have a number of contracts for final consideration.
Thank you. President Scott, members of the board, Dr. Huff, tonight the administration presents for your final consideration proposed contracts first presented to you during your July 8th meeting. The contracts as presented incorporate revisions discussed by the board during your prior meeting and agreed to by the contractor. Seeking your approval this evening to those contracts.
Do I have a motion? I have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
Do I have any discussion?
Can you identify what those changes might have been?
Well, Mr. Weaver, there were a number of changes dealing with the first contract that incorporated a number of changes in terms of one, talking about what had happened in the prior, under the prior contract with this particular individual in terms of attendance, but also establishing some very clear goals that the contractor is to meet moving forward. As to the second contract, we clarified some issues in terms of how we'll deal with that contract in terms of the number of buildings and number of students moving forward. So in both of those contracts, we really, I think, improved the contracts for the district through the process of further negotiations.
I would make a suggestions that when we bring these back and there's changes made, kind of put them in italics, so they're easier to find in there. I'd appreciate it. Thanks.
Okay.
I just have a quick comment. This goes to, I guess, old business and new business. Maybe in the future, if we could divide it up over some time. We had 389 pages of contracts, and I guess being an attorney, I actually read them, and it took a little while, but
Depends on how fast you read.
yeah. So that would be my only comment, but I do appreciate the diligence you had with the memos with presenting each one, and as Mr. Weaver stated, I think your memo did address some of the changes and laid them out, but to clean up just a little bit in the future would be great. But thank you for the work you've done on these.
That I feel your pain in terms of reading all of those contracts and all of the links to various different components of the contracts that the vendors never really show us until we dig in deep enough to find them all.
Correct. Yeah, I normally start with the term and jurisdiction and get the easy stuff out of the way, and then it goes on for there. So I have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Now on to new business, contracts for initial consideration.
Yes, this evening, the administration presents for your initial consideration contracts, which would be recommended for approval, not this evening, but at the following meeting. And I think you'll find a lot of information related to those specific contracts. Of course, if there are changes you'd like to see, please communicate that to my office so we can begin having conversations with those various different vendors and contractors.
Thank you. And I do like this new format. This is a format that we started, I believe, having the contracts, being able to go through them. Any issues that we have, we'll get to your office, gives you plenty of times to contact the vendor to make any appropriate changes or ask for any negotiated terms and then get back to us. So I think this does, even though it was 389 pages, I do believe it does flow.
I also would add that I think it's pointing out to our vendors that we're serious about the terms of contracts and we don't just necessarily agree to everything that is asked from them to us. I can point to a number of contracts that Ms. Brander has worked with me on where she's gone back to vendors and said, you know what, we'd like to pay a little less.
Sure.
And so I think we're seeing some of that as well, is really trying to send those messages to vendors that Elkhart is not just a rubber stamp when it comes to contracts.
And I appreciate that diligence and also the board's diligence as well, going through them and working with you, and then you guys working with the vendors. So I think this process is better now that we actually have a little bit more time to get through these things. So again, great job by you and your team. Thank you very much. Next on the agenda, sale of iPads. Mr. Rhodes.
Good evening, President Scott, members of the board, Dr. Huff. I'm here on behalf of the administration to seek authorization for the bulk sale of our iPads that have hit the end of their life cycle.
Do I have a motion for the bulk sale of the iPads? Do I have a second? I have a motion, I have a second. Do I have any questions or comments from the board? No questions or comments. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Thorne, back to you. Board Policy 3410.04CS, substitute compensation.
Thank you again, President Scott, members of the board, Dr. Huff. The administration is presenting some additional proposed revisions to the substitute compensation plan, which was actually presented to you earlier this summer, but really kind of in light of some of the things you've heard with policy analytics tonight, we're just making sure that in as many areas as possible, the language is clear related to the expenditures for substitute services. And so those are the changes that you're seeing this evening in terms of the policy, so that it's clearly in place and clearly well understood by current and future substitute teachers as to the level of compensation they would be eligible for should they come to work for us or continue to work with us here in Elkhart. Seeking your approval and actually requesting a waiver of second reading.
Do I have a motion to approve the substitute compensation and a waiver of second reading?
Motion.
I have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a motion and I have a second. Do I have any questions or comments regarding substitute compensation? Seeing or hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. And in her debut, Ms. Frost, the financial report.
Good evening. Good evening, Board President, members of the board, Dr. Huff, and the community. I know you've had a very important high-level financial update from Policy Analytics this evening, so I will just provide a brief update on our financials for the year through June. I look forward to providing more detailed analysis as we navigate this process and looking at the budget. But do I have the slides here? Let's see. Financial update. All right, I can narrate. So we have our expenditures. We're just looking at tonight our expenditures and our operations fund and our education fund. Just high level, we are on track with our spend so far from January to June. We average about 3.3 million spent in our operations fund each month. And this month we're at 3.2. So we are on track there. And as for our education fund, the same, we average a little bit over 7.5 million per month in that account in terms of spend. And we are on, within that range this month at 7.4. I'm not saying it's the right level that we want to be at, but we are on track with what we've been doing this year. Just one thing to point out, and just to remind us that we are at 97% expenditure for salary and benefits out of our education fund. So we're trending still a little bit high there. And I also was going to present our cash flow, so equivalent to like what's in your checking account. Good news is we've got a nice, we got our revenues from our property taxes in June, so that increased our cash flow. We still are not where we want to be in terms of kind of a cushion, but we'll continue to work and have these conversations with our partners such as Policy Analytics to get this number right. And that concludes our slide-less financial presentation.
Ms. Ross, one way to adjust on the fly. I appreciate it. What should that, you mentioned 97%, what should that number be?
Yes,
Rough
I'm
estimate.
prepared to answer that. So I've talked to some folks who've, been in public finance and school finance for decades. They've suggested 92% is pretty good. It could go as high as 95, depending on the health of the district in looking at other metrics. So I've heard 92 to 95.
Ross, appreciate
Yeah.
it.
Mhm.
Any other comments or questions from the board? Well, thank you for the financial report. It's a little something we do here with new CFOs. We don't let you see the slides the first time. A little bit of hazing.
See how we do.
Just see how committed you are, and you pass with flying colors. So thank you. Next board meeting, you'll be able to have slides and everything. So
Yeah, thank you.
If it makes you feel any better, I didn't get lunch the first time.
Yeah.
As a new board member.
Right, yeah. His first time, no food, so no lunch. All right, next we have the insurance report.
Yes, so before you, you have an insurance update. We continue to work with our partners, Sumas and Marathon, and making sure that collaboration is working cohesively. You'll see that we have a 79% loss ratio to date as of end of June. This metric measures the percentage of premiums earned that are paid out in claims and related to expenses. So the lower in this ratio, the better. So year to date, losses on trend. So we seem like we are doing pretty well there. Lastly, just a quick update. We are working on communication process improvements with Sumas and Marathon. We're working with them, our business department, to enhance our communication materials. So they're designing some nice materials for us to have ready at back to school, and maybe even post in the teachers' lounges with QR codes where staff can access their benefits, know what they are, and hopefully maximize them as they go along. So that concludes my finance and insurance updates.
Thank you very much. Any questions or comments from the board regarding the insurance? Hearing none or seeing none? Thank you very much. Next on the agenda, Dr. Huff, the floor is yours.
I'll be very brief. I've been giving commentary throughout, so I will be brief with my closing thoughts. I want to first thank one of our business office personnel staff, Jennifer Lee. She was voted to be our representative in District 2 by IASBO, by her peers. That is a huge accomplishment for her. She is probably one of the most friendly people in the world, calm and cool, and I just was very proud. And I know that she would not like public recognition, so let's make sure we put it all on the internet. So, but wonderful, and I think that also says a lot to just about the processes that we have with that business team in the back. So again, hats off to her. I want to give a huge thank you to our building principals and staff that have come in this week and have made thousands of calls to family members regarding registration. We definitely want to make sure those, if you aren't registered, to get your kiddo registered this year. I know that our teams have some staff coming in so they can go in there and register their child. We're a little bit behind with our registration numbers. So again, if you hadn't had an opportunity to register, please reach out to your school. There are somebody there who help you. Thank you, Mrs. Brander, and to the rest of administration, the principals, and the secretarial staff who have been making those calls fiercely. I think over the last week, we've increased registration by up to 321 as of Monday. Is that correct, Ms. Brander? Thank you. So just with that initial push, we've increased 400. So thank you. Hats off to you and your team upstairs. I really appreciate it. And last and not least, I want to welcome all those new staff members to Elkhart Community Schools. I'm very proud for you to join our team. Mr. Rose, I see you over there. Congratulations on your appointment to being the new CTO of the technology department. And you got to present on your first night. Usually that's not how that works. So, but congratulations to you and to all of you who are joining the Elkhart family. You're joining a family that cares for one another, and also a team that's highly committed to making sure that our kiddos are taken care of and we have excellent experiences here. So welcome to everyone. So with that being said, I'll turn it back over to you, President Scott.
Thank you, Dr. Huff.
Oh, I remember Todd Shealy. He's the best. He really is. He make.
Sir, if you give me half a second, I'm going to record that.
Oh, okay. I did.
But, you know,
I was gonna say.
the ego's not big enough.
I said Todd Shealy and his team. They are the best. When I say that, I mean, I know they're unified. Those kids, ROTC, you see them around, they're in orchestra, they're in choir, they're in jazz. Multifaceted to see how much leadership skills are in that group of young people here. It's amazing. And it doesn't start without adult models like yourself back there. So we be remiss. Sometimes coaches are very humble. They just want to make sure the kids get the attention. The coaches are what sometimes keep the kids attracted to school. And so thank you for all our leaders who invested not just in United Track, but I think we had an outstanding year athletically, particularly in the spring season. I think Ben DeVito, you've been all over that. Mr. Weaver, how's he doing?
Actually, I have not got a recent update.
Oh,
Ask Mr. Thorne. He'll help you out.
Actually, I may have it.
No, we're not doing that. Hey, thank you, everyone. I'm going to turn it back over. I'm going to turn it back over to you. They're ready to go.
Oh, yeah.
I'll keep talking while you're
Yeah.
looking. How's that?
Scoreboard. Keep talking. Well, he was
tied for 20th at one.
no, yeah, but he. Hang on. There's only like 175.
For
golfers.
context, we have a freshman, our freshman golf champion, Ben DeVito, who competed at state, is competing nationally in the U.S. amateur golfing. You got it?
Like, it even had a star next to his name. I should have looked for that.
Yeah, you should have.
He started off strong. I think the first 9 holes, he was even. In the back 9, he shot well, it just disappeared. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
It's just a star. The back 9. Oh my goodness. It was just there. I shouldn't have showed it to you.
No,
I think he tied for 101st. But regardless, this was a qualifier. This was the best golfers from across the country, and there's not only United States players. It was I'm looking at the flags here: Canada, Mexico, looks like Turkey, Ireland. Sean Keeling from Ireland. So he represented well. He's a freshman. He's very young. He doesn't have a driver's license yet? Wow, okay. Thank goodness he doesn't drive a cart. So he had a great showing, and I wish I could tell you exactly what it was, but either way, we're very proud of his accomplishments this year. Anyone else? Oh, it went to the top. He finished tied for 165th. He was plus 11. I like my first, tied for 101st. No, 161st, but it was the USGA Junior Amateur Championships in Dallas, Texas. It's a very formidable tournament. That's, when you start playing in these U.S. junior amateurs, that's when you know that there's potential for a future in golf, because they just don't invite everybody. So great job, Ben. I'm sorry. Next time I'll be quicker on the results. Anything else? I will, Mr. Rhodes, you were let off a little easy tonight. I just want to let you know. I understand it was your first time. We were so focused on Ms. Ross that you will have another presentation at some point. So just be prepared for, no slides or something. And with that, meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everybody.